Good morning. For this session, we are going to discuss about legal and ethical issues of or for IT auditors. So you can see on the picture about ethics and how does that guide the professionals and practitioners in the field of audit or IT auditing, since that is our course about IT audit, for example, and that is auditing in a CIS environment. So I'm going to lift again or once again our discussions from the book of Anton about IT audit, core concepts for information technology audits. So the second chapter is about, again or once again, legal and ethical issues for IT auditors. So remember, we have to take note of the basic concept or thing that the legalities or the law would not be the same as the ethical issues or the ethics to begin with. So what is necessarily legal is not necessarily also ethical. And on the other hand, what is ethical is legal in some situations, but not legalized in other countries or places. So sometimes or oftentimes, the law and ethics would not agree with each other. Okay, so there are many things that we would say legalized in certain countries, but some countries wouldn't agree that those are legal because they are basically unethical. Okay, so here are our contents. We have to discuss about code of ethics, irregular versus illegal acts, regulatory and legal issues. Then we talk about the legal contracts and also the computer crime and intellectual property as well as the privacy issues. Okay, let's begin. So the copy sometimes wouldn't be that good or great because these are just snapshots or pictures coming from the chapter. So the introduction would discuss to us that there is a nonprofit organization that dedicates itself to improve the living conditions and lives of software programs and promoting alternatives to brutal software testing. And then, well, 7 more companies have been added to the group's watch list of companies that regularly practice unethical software testing. So in this particular introduction, this shows that there are certain companies that may be doing some things because of pressure, company pressures, management pressures, which are there to the point that they are now going to enter into or deal with unethical things or matters. So in that case, that's why this particular nonprofit organization has been organized. Okay, so the point is that because others are doing it, then perhaps people would rationalize that they can also do it. So that's one thing that would push people to commit fraud. Anyhow, so let's proceed. The ethical codes of conduct are vital to the health of professional societies since members who are asked to conform to societal rules benefit the most from the conformity of others. So I love this particular statement because this shows that for a society to be civilized and to grow, it has to begin with doing ethical things or matters. Of course, ethical codes of conduct would guide people to be professional, to act accordingly, to differentiate right from wrong, as being said in a lot of textbooks and sources. And then I would say, though, that because people wanted immediate results, that's why they are going to deal with unethical or even illegal acts or matters. So if we follow really the ethical matters, then that would take longer time or period of time to achieve that. Okay, next is code of ethics. Why is there a need to develop ethical codes? So as said, this is going to guide individuals, especially for organizations, the people composing therein, to do what is the best for the company or business or employer or for themselves in the most ethical or even on the ethical manner or matters. So that's why there are written guidelines or ethical guidelines which are ever present in companies. So as said, not all people will act ethically under all circumstances. So this goes to say that people would really do unethical things if given the opportunity, the pressure, and then the attitude and rationalization. So they would be doing that anyway. So for sure, people also have done ethically under certain situations, but like in all or overall, people would really commit unethical matters at some points in time. So the pressures can be social, economic, political, and others. Good people to do bad things. So that's why it is also said that code of ethics keep good or keeps good people good. It keeps honest people honest because we wouldn't want to waste the positive characteristics of people. So that's the point. Here it is. Just like locks and doors, ethical codes will keep or will help to keep honest people honest. So here are our guidelines and the outline for ethical codes of conduct. So these are the 6 good reasons. It would define acceptable behaviors for relevant parties. Okay, that's clear. Then high standards of practice, there would be a benchmark as connected with 2 and 3. So if we have the standards, the benchmark, then we would be attaining, we would strive to attain, we would be pushing ourselves to attain those standards and benchmarks so that we can evaluate ourselves in the process. Then the framework also would be established for professional behavior, obligations, and responsibilities. So the guidelines, of course, can be very specific, just like the policies of the company or just like the human resources manual or the employees manual. Then it is going to offer for a vehicle for occupational identity. So we can identify ourselves from the others in terms of positions in the company and our tasks, duties, and responsibilities, or TDR, as said in human resources subject. And it would reflect a mark of occupational maturity. So if ever there is there, or the there, what I meant is the ethical code of conduct is present in the company, so it would show that the organization is mature enough. And hopefully that particular code of conduct that is written is not just like any paper document that is left in the cabinet to gather dust. So it should be something that is practiced and is followed by people in the organization. So likewise, in the field of audit and auditing, there are also guidelines being implemented or shown. So in fact, we have the ISACA organization for the CISA certification, Certified Information Systems Auditor, that would be giving to us the 10 ethical standards. So here are the 10 ethical standards. For some parts, these are clearly shown. These are readable items, so we will not be discussing them in detail. Perhaps I'm going to look into some parts. One that's done to about diligence, loyalty, and honesty, okay? Then we are bound by disclosure agreements. We should not be, or rather non-disclosure agreements, even disclosure. So in non-disclosure agreements, we are not going to provide private and confidential matters. So we'll, for example, disclose only very limited information if warranted on the situation. But we may disclose if we are now summoned by courts to act as witnesses. So that's also one thing that we can think about that. Then we must avoid from or refraining from engaging any or in any activities that would impair our independence and objectivity. So we want that our independence would be total, would not be impaired, because independence can be both in mind and appearance. So the sum of the mind internal and appearance external would be the total independence, and that is the independence of fact. Okay, number 5, competency. Okay, done. 6, professional competence. 7 is that we perform our duties with professional care. Number 8, then we have to inform the appropriate parties, for example, our clients and the management, about the material facts, most especially those items. And even the immaterial ones, should we uncover, and even also fraud, we have to communicate to management, although that's not going to be our main consideration should we do audit, because in audit, we think of material items, so either due to errors or fraud. But should we uncover like really the fraud itself, then we are going to communicate with appropriate authorities. For example, the management, or for fraud in relation to certain people that we really or who we really identified. So we have to communicate at least a level higher than the alleged person. The 9 is we have to support the education of the stakeholders. And number 10, the high standards of conduct should be maintained, and we should not engage in acts discreditable to the profession. So that would be considered, I don't want to use the word, but let's just say shameful to the profession. That's the word, discreditable. All right. Then the code of ethics, of course, would show that if we fail to comply to such, then there is investigation that can happen. And ultimately, it would result to disciplinary action. So that's one thing that should be remembered about this one. Next, that's the code of ethics. Next is irregular versus illegal acts. To summarize, if we say irregular, that means, of course, violation. But the question is, what do we or did we violate? So if we just violate, for example, the corporate policies or regulatory requirements unintentionally, that is simply a mistake, right? An honest mistake. But if we violate them intentionally, that becomes irregular act. And then what about illegal acts? So that's really the intentional breach of law. If the breach of law is just unintentional, then that's going to be an illegal act. So we have to know that the most obvious act under this umbrella is fraud. So this fraud is that there is an intentional way or manner to deceive others. Why is that? In order to achieve unfair or unlawful personal gain at the expense of another party. So we want that we will be benefiting at the expense of the others. So in that case, we do deception, we deceive, we lead or make others to believe that something is or as it is, but it's not. So that is the reason that there is fraud. Okay, so fraud can also happen in computerized environment or information systems environment. Since if that involves like software, so there can be also ways to manipulate and deceive and produce altered or wrong information. So that's the point also of this one. Next, professional guidance. So as said, our code of ethics will guide us professionally. Then also the ISACA guidelines would be governing what can happen in an organization that is, of course, with the implication or the usage of IT or information technology in the company. So if ever we are IT auditors, then we have to follow the guidelines should we do audits with our clients. So we have to take note though that management is responsible for the prevention and detection of irregular and illegal acts, not the IT auditor. So should we do any audit, we have to remember in our auditing theory subjects, which is, this is a basic rule, that what are we auditing for? For example, the financial statements of our client. Who made the financial statements? The client. So it should be them who are primarily responsible of the reports that they are preparing. The IT auditors would just be there to provide, or the auditors, financial statement auditors going back, would be there to provide their professional opinion or conclusion about the subject matter based on the criteria. So the subject matter would be the financial statements, and the criteria would be the GAAP or the IFRS or PFRSS, the financial reporting standards, of course. So, of course, that's one thing that should be taken into consideration, not the IT auditors who are responsible for those matters in terms of preparation and presentation. So when IT auditors or any auditors would come in, then the subject matter should be ready to be audited, right? Then we have to take note also that IT auditors are not qualified to determine whether an irregular, illegal, or simply erroneous act has occurred, because that has to be determined by an expert. The expert of that could be a qualified expert, of course, such as the lawyer or judge. So clearly, the IT auditors, as a rule, do not have background about law or legality. So that's why they are not qualified, unless, of course, they're also lawyers. So the extent to which the observed unusual act is material to the financial statements as a whole, or taken as a whole, is outside the scope of an IT audit. So if we talk about financial statements, it will be the task of CPAs to do materiality judgments. All right. So that's why it is something that we are going to take note and should be differentiating one thing over the other. Okay, so here are the steps and the responsibilities to think about IT auditors' responsibilities to irregular and illegal acts. So we don't have to memorize them because we can go over with them anyway as to what can be done in the process. But we can just summarize this one by saying that in terms of the responsibilities, so IT auditors would be there to give again the professional opinion and conclusion, and then should be reporting to appropriate authorities should there be matters involving irregular and illegal acts uncovered, but they are not their responsibilities. Then if there would be suspected fraud or even committed fraud really that happened, it shall be, or they shall be communicated to appropriate authorities at least a level higher than the suspected ones. So that's also one thing that we have to take note. We can just notice here like the report, plan, the IT audit, and the procedures. The results of the procedure should be reviewed because there can be irregular and illegal acts. If there can be suspected ones, so we have to report to people at least one level higher. Now, in terms of fraud also, remember if this is the corporate setup and we have the board of directors on top, the board of directors should have certain people composing the audit committee who are, that is independent, largely independent from the people performing line functions, because we know that the board of directors can also be part of the operations of the business or corporation. So the IT auditor should communicate directly to the independent audit committee. And then those people would be charged with the governance. Anyhow, so the sad thing is that if the audit committee itself is not independent, or let's just say is biased about matters or things. So what's the reason that those people, so why is that? It's because if people would be reporting to those especially the people that I'm talking about would be IT auditors, would communicate or would report to those people in the line. So it is very awkward to begin with. And it is going to be like a matter of, will I report this to the person wherein my employment would be on the line, or would be something that would be, let's just say, removed anytime by the people superior to you. So can you just imagine, like, you evaluated the performance about or in relation to IT audit. Let's just say the CEO, you report to the CEO, but the CEO also has the power over your employment. So for sure, any matters that would involve negative ones would be not reported, would be screened, would be removed out in favor of that CEO. So that's the sad thing that can happen in organizations. And to prevent that, that's why IT auditors should be furnishing or making their reports directly to the audit committee. Okay, next, assume that the act is not isolated. So we have to take note that the act is going to affect others. So that act is not an island, as being said in an idiomatic way. So any act can affect others, can be connected with also other irregular or illegal acts. Then determine how the acts slip through the internal control system. How come there is a strong internal system, but then the acts slip through? So one thing that we can also remember or take note about this one is that if management collusion can happen, so example, if the management together with the rank and file employees would be conniving, would be agreeing to commit fraud, then that's going to be very challenging on the part of the IT auditors and as well as the financial statement auditors to determine the extent of that particular fraud. Normally, that would remain undetected in situations wherein it's really crystal clear that it has been manufactured properly. Then how to continue that? We have to broaden audit procedures. So increase substantive testing of procedures as being said in auditing theory. Then another one is, should there be additional procedures of audit to perform? And then the results check. After that, is there a need to consult legal counsel? Sometimes there would be internal lawyers to begin with. Then corporate governance bodies to estimate the impact potential, of course, of the irregular and illegal acts because these are like suspected items. So you think of the potential impact as a whole on the subject matter, then report all facts and circumstances of the irregular and illegal acts, whether suspected or confirmed, and distribute the report to appropriate internal parties as needed. So these internal parties should be above or one level above or higher than the others. Next, the IT auditors to begin with are obligated to keep such matters confidential. We are bound by confidentiality of our tasks or our matters at hand in engagement. But then again, IT auditors, since they are not qualified about illegal matters, irregular acts, or illegal acts, then we cannot be compelled also to determine like what matters related to those are existing in the organization. However, if, for example, we are knowledgeable, then we might be asked to provide the information, especially if there is subpoena. So as what I've said a while ago, if we will be asked to go to courts and provide evidences about such acts, then we are not qualified to determine the legal status of unusual acts or acts rather, unless we are lawyers. Okay, next, for the issues, there are certain legal terms that we have to know of. First one is legal contract. So of course, in our Philippine laws, for a contract to be there must be the three essential elements, the COC. We have the consent, or that's the meeting of minds or agreement. O means the object or subject matter of the contract, and C is the consideration or the price or the value of the transaction or contract. Then here it is. Contract is an agreement. It's mating of the minds of two or more persons to do or not to do something in return for an exchange of consideration. So this is under US, so there can be some words which are different, like in terms of what could be there in the contract or what should be, there are some words which are different. So example of that, let us check. So the matters could be different, like there is an offer as said for the consideration or cost. So the term is offer here. Accordingly, at a minimum, auditors should look to ensure that at least three elements are contained in a contract: offer, consideration, and acceptance. So you have the consideration or cost, then the offer, which is the subject matter, and then the acceptance in addition to that. So like the elements are different, but then we have to follow our Philippine laws because we're in the Philippines, but we must have to pay respect also with the other laws. So we have to follow the legalities. Anyway, very connected, or I mean, said rather. So we have, for example, offer, consideration, and acceptance. So offer is the subject matter that is furnished to the other party. Example, this is a sale contract, so we furnish the product to our buyer or prospective client or customer. And then consideration is the price or value of that particular contract. Acceptance is if, for example, our offer, the furnishing of our respective product will be accepted by the buyer. All right. Then what else? We have the essential elements of the contract as said. The offer should be in plain, unequivocal language. So thank you for unlocking the meaning. It should be clear. It should be specifically stated in the contract, like the terms or the tenor of the agreement, time, place, quality, and so on. The consideration, of course, should also be there or clear, like how much, and then certain sum in or of money. The amount should be clear also, and the acceptance should also be clear, like the agreement should properly identify the offeree who is being offered to by the offeror. And in case of a written contract, then sign, meaning the signature and the date should be there in the contract. So why is there a need to reduce the contract into writing? Of course, we have known that our memory is limited. We cannot determine and we cannot recall like all things that happened about the contract or transaction. So that's why you better reduce into writing the terms. Also to protect both parties in the process and in the long run. Next, for employee contracts, this is an employment contract. Now, the discussions here are somewhat obscure and different in terms of the Philippine laws. Like, for example, that the contract is unilateral, so meaning it is the offerer that makes the promise or a promise and the offerer chooses to accept the offer at will at his or her disposal as indicated by his or her continued performance. So in other words, that's the reason why employees can, of course, end or terminate the contract because it is at will. The employee is not bound to a unilateral contract. So only the employer can breach the contract, for instance, if the employer refuses to pay certain compensation as promised, and that promise is violated. So in Philippine laws, this might be different. I'm not a lawyer, of course, but then this can be really different because if you think of a contract, it's going to be really like with certain two parties. So as to the extent, if ever Philippine laws really have followed the concept of unilateral contracts for employment, so that's one thing that we can, of course, think about. Anyway, so we just have to follow this one. because it is stated anyway later on that yet a unilateral contract is just as enforceable as a bilateral contract. All right. In this case, I like the statement that neither party suffers a loss if they terminate the contract unless the employer violates statute or common law in the process. So employer can abruptly release an employee for good cause, and the employee can abruptly terminate the contract by not performing the required work. But of course, there would be written contracts. So that's why it will protect both parties in case that there would be some issues like you have to perform these particular tasks or should be doing these. And that's the reason that there could be some cases that the employees will have to be removed from the position and will be asked to resign from the position than just like removing immediately the person. Okay, also as a good way of giving credence to the pride and the good times and the mindset there is of that particular employee. Okay, so that's also one thing that we have to think about in employment. So this is something again that is a gray area. You can just notice also the writings. It's not that clear because there might be some violations with our learnings and let's just say the laws that we have determined and known of in the Philippine setup. Like for example, what an employment contract cannot include because it is not enforceable by law is that the employee must work for the employer for a stated period of time. So that's the reason that the employment contract is an at-will contract for an indefinite period of time. So meaning what is being said here is that it cannot be stated like what particular time an employee can work. But in the Philippines, it's really clear that it's 8 to 5 and so on. So that's why I said there can be some differences and gray areas of the employment laws there in the US and in the Philippines. Okay, or other countries as well, because these are legal matters. Next, confidentiality agreement. So certain employees may be asked to not disclose certain information because these are very critical information. As said in auditing subjects as well as accounting information system subjects, that information is also treated as a scarce or limited resource of a business and it can either make or break it. So that's why certain secret formulas and processes would not be disclosed to certain persons. All right. And then in relation to that, I've told you the trade secret, which would not be shared. So these are the lifeblood of many successful organizations in terms of the procedures or steps of making the products, let's say the recipes, the menus, these are going to be treated as intangible assets of the organization. So example would be the recipe, secret formulas. These are treated as intangible assets, part of the non-current assets of certain organizations. However, if these particular items like recipes, formulas, patterns, techniques, processes, and so on are already disclosed to the public, then these do not become part anymore of the intangible assets of the organization since everybody knows about them anyway in the long run. Or as the company disclose the information, so it's no longer a secret. So it's not something that would really benefit the organization alone. So control is an important element in recognition of an asset that there is a right to create a right or stop the right over an asset. Like for example, there is a right that can be created to use the asset and there is a right to stop or terminate that usage anytime within the bounds of the contract. All right. Another one also is discovery agreements. For discovery agreements, in this case, in case that employees would be able to develop certain ideas or inventions, then they might own the intellectual rights to such discoveries depending on the state and circumstances or even the contract. So one example of that would be if a certain person is asked really to be in a research and development department for the organization. So that person is paid, meaning any intellectual property and discoveries made would really accrue or belong to the company because the management or client or the company in the first place hired that person. Next, non-compete agreements would be something, a covenant, which also means an agreement that a certain employee cannot compete with the organization or the employer for a certain period of time if that person would go out of the business. So this can have additional consideration or no consideration at all. If the non-compete agreement is signed before or immediately after employment, so meaning it is before or like during employment, so the consideration is not required because the employment itself is the consideration. Of course, you are an employee now of the organization, then you must not compete with your employer or your management or the business. However, if that is during or upon termination, so after employment, in that case, additional amount may be required. Take note, the word is may. It's not really a requirement, but because we are preventing the person to compete, so there must be something also to consider or think about in terms of value. Next of that is trading partner contracts. In the organization, it's really very possible that there would be contracts between the companies and their trading partners. Example would be customers and vendors. So why again are contracts there? In order to protect the parties. That's number one. So that's the proactive approach. The second one is, of course, for the reactive, that in case negative things happen, so there is something that we can refer to that, oh, this is the provision of the contract and we have to abide and follow that. And even, for example, there's no contract that is written, so both parties can also impose with each other as to the indemnification of the benefits and damages, depending also on what type of contracts there are or made. But that's the reason again that contracts really are written for the protection of both parties. In fact, it can also include penalties or penal clauses so that in case one violates, so the other can get the damages or interest from the other. Okay, so there's a review of the three essential elements or prerequisites: offer, acceptance, and consideration. So you have here an example of employee non-compete agreement, that the non-compete agreement shall extend only for a radius of how many miles and for how many years, and the date. Of course, there is the name of the company and the employee and the signatures, of course. Then anyway, for the trading partner contracts, from the word trading, so that involves the buying and selling activities, so the sale of goods and services, and therefore it is normally written. It's like also a standard template containing certain information that must be present. All right, so after that, there is now the discussion involving computer crime and intellectual property. Now, after that is the computer crime and intellectual property. So crimes or criminal acts can also happen in organizations, especially if there is not much of internal controls happening that are effective, and fraud can be connived or colluded between two or more people, either of the same level or of different levels, and especially involving management. So management fraud can be really something that is challenging to detect. Then intellectual property is also mentioned, those items of discoveries and etc. And then after this, I think it's the arrangement of the content of this particular chapter, but this one is contract template. So for trading partner contracts, these are the normal contents that we should take note of, but allow me to summarize. So just a sideway or off tangent discussion before we proceed really to computer crime and intellectual property. So among the items here, probably we're going to look into the parts in which they are not really, let's say, familiar to us, or they could be something that should be explained further on. So example of that would be the second page of the items under the trading partner contract, especially with this one, force majeure. Like what would happen if there would be the so-called fortuitous events or acts of God or nature? So what can happen and what would happen to the goods there that are to be delivered? So example, if the piece of equipment was to be shipped by air freight and then the plane crashes, so does the buyer still have to pay or is the sale then null and void? So what would be the protection of both parties? And that's why insurance can really be there to protect them. And then what can also be done, for example, in terms of that freight company that is there? So what can be done so that we can minimize or alleviate the losses? So these are the things that should be taken into account or consideration. Then export control, so the barriers to the trade. So those items wherein the exporter or let's say the seller of other goods from other countries will be delivering the goods to the buying company or to the importer. So what are the instructions or what are the legalities, what items that should be taken into account or considered in the process in order to be able to comply with such or them. And we have to take note again or once again that this can be different from one country over the other. All right, so especially nowadays in the pandemic we're in, aside from those items like legal requirements, good thing that we can mention or connect this now, that there could be some health restrictions or protocols that should be followed also. Then disclosures, intended use. Okay, so those items are, for example, known by us. Any warranty, so in case that certain damages that are existing on the items or the products or that can happen within a period. So are those covered? Are those for free? And then, or are those for free only to the service but not to the materials to be used along the way? Okay, so these are again the items, penalties in case that there would be cancellations and in case that there would be some defects. So will the buyers also have the possibilities or the capabilities to ask for refund, which is normally there, right? Even if we're talking about simple items like groceries, there's the DTI provision that such can be replaced for 7 days, right? So there's that provision even for those products, and we do not necessarily follow the no refund policy, something like that. But then it's also stated like no refund as there because it is also for the protection of the seller. Otherwise, any buyer can just return the goods anytime soon. So that's why there's a provision that yes, you can make a refund provided that you do it for 7 days, the product is intact, and then the receipt is there, the packaging is there. So something like that. Those provisions should be there. Next, computer crime. So to define computer crime or cyber crime, cyber means or in relation to computer, that is any direct or indirect use of computer and communication technologies to perpetrate a criminal act. Perpetrate simply means to make or commit or do any criminal act for that matter. So example of that would be, let's say, hacking into an entity's network, of course, with the usage of computers, because hacking, of course, has something to do with using codes, using computer software capabilities in order to penetrate unethically and illegally entities network that could either result to losses or damages, which can be very dramatic for the organization, financially speaking, or damaging other items if not financial. So example of that will be the, let's say, hacking into the system to the point that it becomes unresponsive, just like what happened to eBay and Amazon that resulted to losses of billions of dollars. even just for hours. So because the system has been hacked anyway. So these things can really be considered crimes rather, or cyber crimes or computer crimes, if ever computers are made in order to perpetrate or do or commit them. All right. Then intellectual property is also mentioned. Anyway, this has been discussed in our accounting subjects even, but let me just highlight or mention the Intellectual Property Code of the Philippines, which protects the parties in the process. So this particular law would protect those people who discovered certain intangible assets, who have great discoveries which are unique from the others. So to be considered intellectual property, it has to be valuable. It has to be, of course, valuable in the sense it is novel, it is unique, it is useful to people, and not of an obvious nature. So it is really something that has never existed before. All right, so it actually comes from human mind, such as inventions, literary and artistic works, symbols, images, and designs. So it can either be industrial or individual. Industrial would be patents and trademarks in relation to commerce, about businesses, and individual would be about copyrights of literary and artistic works, such as novels, poems, and plays, etc. So those that relates to literary is going to be individual. So sometimes, if not oftentimes, these items are also violated in cybercrime. Now, there are intangible assets that are mentioned, but these are the common ones: patents, trademarks, and copyright. For patents, we have to talk about discoveries, and then machines, human-made products, compositions of matter, and processing methods. Trademarks, on the other hand, would be certain unique symbols or designs or pictures or names to identify or distinguish the identity of one entity over the other. Then trademarks would be the logos of certain businesses, like the check mark of Nike. So just a simple symbol, but we can know that, oh, that's Nike and that's the organization that we are referring to. Also the words, also the symbols, and the design. After that, we also have the copyright. So the copyright, again, we'll talk about the literary works. So these are very important because depending on the countries, of course, the protection could be for a certain time. So in the Philippine setting, let me just mention that for patents, that's going to be 20 years. It's the same. So non-renewable period of 20 years. The legal would be 20, but then the useful life could be more or less than that. Trademarks, that's going to be 10 years, and then it's going to be different from one, for example, organization, or let's say one country over the other in terms of its useful life. All right, and then that's why again, or once again, as what I've said, the useful life could be different from one organization or country or another, because we have to determine also the internal factors. So the matters wherein the discoverer or the artist is there, or that particular person is in that particular environment. And also the external factors should be considered in terms of how many years would that particular intangible asset, like the patent, trademark, or copyright, would be beneficial to the entity or company. So those items should be also taken into account. Then copyright is lifetime of the author and another 50 years after that. That is under Philippine setup or setting. For the other countries, could be 70 years. I've read somewhere in US, so that's more. And that's going to be really enough, and it's going to be very beneficial for the beneficiaries or the family members, especially the offsprings or the children, descendants of the people having these intangible assets. Most especially, I would like to highlight the copyright, like the literary works, that it's lifetime plus 50 years of this writing, but then I read that there's also 70 years, depending perhaps on the state of the US. Then efforts to thwart. When you say thwart, that is to prevent or minimize cybercrime from happening. So there are some laws that are made along the way. Take note, this is legal and ethical issues for IT auditors. So we have to take note that there are laws in the US setup, So we can look into the laws in relation to IT audit. So we think about networks, we think about the devices, the information technology capabilities that there are existing. So we have the fraud and related activity with the access devices, computers, then communication lines. What if there would be some interception if somebody gets information from us illegally and then intentionally to intercept or do that, then disclosure of information that is illegal also. Then illegal or unlawful access to stored communication. So contents are disclosed. Then what would be the requirements for governmental access? Because normally any communication that is done in private should not be involving also the government. But what if the government would like to get the information? So it must be also in a form of certain formalities. So there must be certain ways by which it can be done legally. Because as a rule, again, what is private is private. Next, cyber information crimes, normally, if it's going to happen into the business, would really have to breach the following items. Confidentiality. So if ever, for example, certain information has been obtained without authorization of that person. So it is with unauthorized access. So confidentiality would be compromised or breached. Integrity, on the other hand, if the, let's say, information has been changed, has been altered without authorization also of the concerned parties. Availability is, for example, if somebody wants to use the information or have access to the information reliably and timely, but is prevented. So these three items are breached normally if crimes are there. The word is ramifications. Ramifications would be the complexities of the crimes. Then here are also items that would be connected to what we would like to discuss. So here are some computer crimes that happened along the way. So of course we do not memorize, but we can research and read them online as to the cases that are involved here. So here is a summary of the recent cybercrime cases. For this figure 2-4, let's go to that after the summary of some recent cybercrime cases. So in the Philippines, even there can be some cybercrime cases that happened. For this one, 2-4, what are the examples of cybercrime that are or that will be happening in relation to patents, and what can IT auditors do in the process? So in terms of patents, trademarks, and copyrights, so of course, normally we have to determine as to the surrounding circumstances of those particular intangible assets. So example, for patents, the techniques, trademarks would be the logos and etc. For the copyrights would be the content of such, how those or these items would be different with or with the others. So have they, for example, complied with the legalities so that these items would be properly registered and so that the parties' rights would be protected in the process. So this is something, and these are the things that should be there so that the parties involved would be protected once again in the process. So we keep on we keep on saying that there has to be protection of the parties because that's very important. That's the point that we have to perform, we have to comply with all the legal requirements. Then after that, we also have certain discussions in relation to the laws or legalities. So it's really discussed in detail as to what can be done by IT auditors. This part here, figure dash 4, would show to us certain suggestions. These are not items that we have to really memorize in the process, but at least we know the concept as to what can be done so that we can really be guided as IT auditors or future IT auditors in the process. Then the laws here, the codes are very specific. Okay, next would be privacy issues. Now, privacy is a penumbra right, as said. Why is that a penumbra right? If we can remember discussions in our science subjects or physics, that if ever, for example, there is a light that strikes to a material that is really solid, a shadow is being casted. Now, if you look at the shadow, or if we do that, the shadow that is casted normally has a part that is lighter and the part, let's say a gray area, and the part really that is black. So that black is clearly something that is clear. Of course, it can be seen, but the gray area or the light shadow is something that is vague or that is not clear. And that is the penumbra, right? Because privacy is not clearly black and white. Like, this is private and this is not private. So white is the private, black is not the private one. So something like that. But penumbra is a gray area. So it's not clear as black and white, respectively. So privacy is a gray area. What is private from one country is not in another country. What is, for example, private of one person is not necessarily private to another. So that's something that we have to take note about privacy. But there are directives, of course, to protect the parties in the process, not only the individuals, but also the businesses, as to what constitutes privacy. All right. So we have here also the acts that were existing or that existed in order to protect the privacy of the respective parties in the process. I kept on saying like in the process because this is how it is. Like, in order for us to be protected, we have to follow certain steps and procedures and legalities along the way. That's not something that is automatic. So we have to emphasize that in the process, a certain person or business will be protected, legally speaking, if there has been compliance with the requirements. So again, or once again, we don't memorize these laws. We just have to know like which laws are applicable to our cases or situation. Example of that is the Right to Financial Privacy Act of 1978. So this has to do with financial institutions protection about their records, the privacy of their records. So in this particular part here, we have to know that this is a legal or the law or the legal matters or laws in US. So this would not necessarily be in relation to the Philippines. We have also our different laws. And that's the reason that we have to get past through these acts so we can just set them aside for the meantime. And then certain information has to be protected, could be factual or subjective. So factual data or information, of course, are the items wherein they are there, cannot be changed, cannot be altered, like the age, name, income. Income, of course, can change, but then that's true for that specific period of time. DNA, for example, the numbers and our SSS, for example, numbers or whatever ID numbers there are, which are normally permanent in nature. Okay. And then safe harbor rules of the US Department of Commerce about what should be done on certain items like notice, choice, so to be able to be protected in the process. All right, so that ends particularly the legal and ethical issues for IT auditors, which is clearly a lengthy topic or chapter, but very important so that the parties will be protected in the process. And thank you for listening for this particular session. Thank you and God bless.